So I just told you a story about how a couple of people got to an assignment. Well, I told you about the deaf woman. Well, she's very tired waiting on an interpreter. Well, a deaf person arrives and he notices that this is a waiting room full of people and he's really not sure where the deaf person is. So he walks up to the secretary and writes notes back and forth asking if she knows who the deaf person is, and he realizes that she's pretty busy, so he just sits down and waits. A hearing interpreter arrives at that time and is pretty flustered. She missed her train, and so she walks up to the secretary, and Sim comes. Do you know where my deaf patient is? Hoping that the deaf patient will notice her and approach. Well, at that time, the deaf interpreter walked up and said, "Hi, I'm an interpreter." And the hearing interpreter said, "What? Yeah." And the deaf interpreter says, "Yeah, we're gonna team. We need to sit down and work this out. How is this gonna go?" Well, at that time, the deaf woman notices the two of them signing and approaches them and says, "Hey, I'm deaf." And the deaf interpreter says, "I'm deaf too. She will voice for me and I will sign for you." At that time, a hearing social worker walks up and says, "Okay, it's time to start this meeting." And there's no time to work anything out, but they proceed into the meeting room. Well, while they're in the hall, walking towards the meeting room, the hearing interpreter and the social worker are walking side by side, chit chatting. And I, the deaf interpreter, am walking next to the deaf client. I try to get the attention of the hearing interpreter to say, we need to figure this out. But she says, "Oh, I got, oh, I'm a little bit busy." And then I say, "Well, we need to figure this out. Do you mind, taking time to talk with me?" Well, there was no time. We all had to go into the meeting room. So in the room, there's the four of us. We walk in. The social worker sits down. The deaf consumer sits across from her. The hearing interpreter sits next to the social worker. And I say, "Do you mind switching places with me? I need to see the deaf consumer so we can have better communication access." And so the hearing interpreter says fine and switches places. Um, at the meeting, the social worker and the hearing interpreter realize that they both have Spanish backgrounds and continue to chit chat about it. The deaf interpreter says, "Can you please tell me what's going on?" And she says, "Oh, we're just talking about, our Spanish background's pretty cool," and, keep chit chatting about it. The deaf woman's like, "What's going on?" And I explain that they're just talking about their backgrounds and they're both from Spanish descent and stuff like that. So, anyway, I say, "Okay, now go ahead and give me the information." Oh, hold on just a second. And then she asks the social worker, "What's the meeting about? What are we going to discuss here today?" And so then the hearing interpreter just feeds me a little bit of tidbits and I try to assign it to the deaf patient. But she's like, the hearing interpreter says, "Oh, I got this. I know I've been pregnant 3 times. I've lost a child before. I can do this. You don't have to work. I got this. I'll gesture myself. I got it." And the deaf interpreter says, "I can do this. I can interpret. Just give me the information and I'll expand on it. I'll interpret for the deaf consumer." And the hearing interpreter says, "I got this. I can gesture." And so, anyway, the deaf person is feeling that the deaf interpreter is not understanding the information clearly. There's a lot of conversation going on in English and Spanish, and there's some sign and some gesturing. So there was a lot of confusion. And the deaf person says, "This isn't making sense. I'm not understanding." Uh, I tell the hearing interpreter, just tell me what's going on and I can interpret." And the hearing interpreter says, "I got it," and tries to gesture some more. The deaf person is looking at me saying, "This isn't making sense. I don't understand." And so there's a lot of signing and gesturing. I'm trying to get the information to the deaf consumer, but the hearing interpreter keeps interrupting, saying, "Oh, I got it, I got it." And so there's a lot of communication or miscommunication going on in the room. When it's all said and done, everybody gets up, everybody says their goodbyes, shakes hands, and it's over. So I approach a hearing interpreter and say, "Do you mind that we just speak briefly, just for a few minutes?" The hearing interpreter says, "Oh, I don't have time. I am so far behind. I've got to go. I'm sorry, I just can't do it." I say, "Don't you just for a few seconds we can just talk? I'll walk out with you." The hearing interpreter says, "No, I've got messages on my phone. I don't have. I've got to go," and walks off. So I approach the deaf woman and ask her if everything was good. Is she okay? And we say our goodbyes, and we both part ways.